a day, you're on your way.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Mooney, co-owner of Women and Children First Bookstore. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I'm so delighted to be here with Lisa Sukenic for the release of her new book, Miles From Motown. We began all of our virtual events the same way we began our in-store events, and that's with the land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge, and I'm hoping you will join me in acknowledging that the land on which our bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. This land taking was by nature violent and damaging in ways that we can't even imagine, and that echoes both past and into the future. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are this afternoon, so that we can all be doing this work together. For those of you in Chicago, I'd also like to mention that our bookstore is mostly reopened at this time. We limit the number of shoppers in the store at one time, and we do require masks, but otherwise we'd be happy to see you. If you're in Chicago, come visit us. If you're not in Chicago, we'd still like to be your feminist bookstore. Visit us at womenandchildrenfirst.com. We do online orders, we do phone orders, we do shipping, we do contactless curbside pickup. So we would be delighted to be your bookstore. Some logistics for this afternoon. We encourage you to ask Lisa and Carol questions. Please use the Ask a Question feature at the mid-center bottom of the screen. We love the chat. I love the enthusiasm and the energy of the chat, but it can be awfully hard to find the questions. So if you have a question for either of them, please type it in under the Ask a Question field. Also, we do encourage you to buy the book, and if you'd be so kind to do so, buy it from us. There is that handy buy the book button on screen for that. With no further ado, let's focus on what we're here for today. Lisa Sukenic is a poet, author, and educator. She teaches 4th grade at the University of Chicago Lab Schools and is co-coordinator of the Global Reading Challenge, which promotes children reading, analyzing, and discussing diverse literature. Lisa has won many awards for both her teaching and writing. Her poetry and short stories have been included in various collections, including in A Reason to Be Here and Everyday Haiku. Carol Coven Grannick is a poet, author, and clinical social worker. She is the author of the middle grade novel Reenie's Turn, and her shorter work for children has appeared in Cricket, Ladybug, and Highlights. She has also published poetry for adults and has a chapbook called Call Me Bob coming out in 2022. She has been the recipient of a Ragdale residency and 2 Illinois Arts Council grants. So please join me. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon with these two, and I'm going to go off camera and turn things over to them.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's fabulous to be here. And today is a special day in a couple of ways for me. In any case, Miles From Motown, even if I didn't know Lisa, Miles From Motown is a beautiful and accessible middle grade historical novel in verse, and I'm so happy to see it out in the world. Lisa and I met, as my father would have said, accidentally on purpose. Our mentor and consultant, Esther Hershenhorn, for a while told both of us, oh, you have to meet Lisa and you have to meet Carol, because we were both writing novels in verse, middle grade. But I have a feeling that Esther had a hunch that there were other commonalities that, sure enough, Lisa and I discovered. When we met, we exchanged our current drafts almost immediately. I vaguely remember like a 3-hour meeting in Panera going over these. And we found ourselves, we met because we never contacted each other the way Esther suggested, but one spring of 2016 at the Illinois SCBWI spring thaw, we found ourselves at the same table, and there we were, and the rest is history, or historical novels in verse. We became critique partners, colleagues, friends, and discovered many similarities in not only our lives, but our writing journeys, and in particular, the journeys with our novels in verse. So I'm so pleased to introduce Lisa Sukenic and her debut historical novel in verse, Miles From Motown.
Thank you, Carol. I would like to start first off by thanking Lynn Mooney and Sarah Hollenbeck from Women and Children First in Chicago for being so gracious to invite me and to hold our launch today. It's a wonderful bookstore. If you're ever in the area, if you're not local, please stop by in Andersonville. It's a community resource, and I buy all of my books there for classroom usage and personal use. And they have local authors as well as international authors coming and visiting. My next thank you, I'd like to thank Janie Royal, who is the founder, publisher, and editor of Regal House Fitzroy Books, and Pam Van Dyke, my editor for Miles, and for selecting Miles for the 2019 middle grade crack contest as a finalist, which led to the publication. I would also like to thank Esther Hirschenhorn, my writing coach, fabulous writing coach, actually, and my critique partners, which include Ellen Pridmore, Megan Kelly, Carol Coven Grannick, Libby Esther, and Lisa Major.
Lisa, I'd love to introduce potential readers and our colleagues who are here to the story. Some of us know the story, but I'd like you to begin with the introduction to the story with the opening verse, because it's really a fabulous entry point that organically includes so many issues that are there in the story without sacrificing the lyrical quality of the verse and the emotional impact of the story. Would you mind reading the first poem, which is The Last Day of School, and then telling us a little bit how the story unfolds?
Sure. I'm going to be reading the first page. Detroit, Michigan, Friday, June 16th, 1967, the last day of school. I can barely hear Mrs. Murphy telling us to mail our poems for the city's Spirit of Detroit contest. The classroom ceiling spins round and round. The whir isn't soft, it's a fast twirling sign, like the cards that Ceci and I put on our bike spokes. She passes out envelopes to write our addresses. I pause, pencil to envelope, and take a breath. Hold the pencil tight and write, George Johnson, 1896, Winton, Detroit. My Aunt Birdie's address, not mine. I start to sweat, not because I'm on the third floor on a hot day in the middle of June at Rutherford Elementary School. I know the rules, even though Mrs. Murphy reads them aloud again. All poets must live in Detroit to win. I'm starting a lie, but I don't care. My parents are making us move to the suburbs. I keep asking why, but they won't tell me. They're taking me too far from who I know, too far to walk back here. I want to stay stuck in time like a movie in slow motion. Next year, my friends will go to junior high in Detroit. I won't be in class with my best friend Ceci for the first time ever. Mrs. Murphy says, Gwendolyn Brooks will choose the winning poem and the winner will receive a letter in July. Her words sound distant, like they are moving through water. Remember how we read Brownsville Boys and Girls and learned to write like real poets? Mrs. Murphy places her hand on my shoulder, especially you, Georgia. I don't want to be called the teacher's pet, so I barely look up. Don't forget to drop your entries in the mailbox. She's telling us to have a wonderful summer. The word wonderful in my life don't mix. The worst part is that when my older brother Ty comes back from Vietnam, he will never live in our old house again.
so much in one verse. Do you want to talk a little bit about the story itself and how it unfolds?
Sure. So the story is from the point of view of Georgia Johnson, and she has just entered the Spirit of Detroit Poetry Contest on the day before she's moving to her last day of school. And she's moving from Detroit to the suburbs, and her family will be one of the first few Black families in the suburban neighborhood. She has to live with worrying about putting the contest entry in, but also she's worried about her brother who's serving in Vietnam and upheaval in her family as they become uprooted and move to a new experience. She does befriend a new friend, Naomi, and the two of them travel this journey together and solve the problem on their own.
You know, readers often ask us during school visits, whatever, whether, you know, I've found that children want to know, is this story your story? Is it autobiographical? How much is true? And I know that you grew up in a suburb of Detroit in Southfield, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what aspects of your upbringing and also what specific memories figured into Georgia's story.
Sure. So although this is a work of fiction, it does deal with childhood friendship and relationships that I had growing up. My grandparents lived in Detroit, and they lived there and worked there, and my father also did. And so we would be back and forth from Detroit and Southfield all the time. And even though the physical distance was small, the distance between the communities could be huge at times. The memories that were specific were Kennedy Elementary School, roller skating and bike riding, coming back to a much times where children spent more time outdoors, baseball in the street, going to the candy store, also difficult times. In addition, the war in Vietnam, Muhammad Ali and his journey and refusing to serve, and also the Motown music in the background as well.
The thing I really love in historical fiction, particularly in Miles from Motown, which also reflects a time when I was growing up, are all the details that feel so natural in the story, and it's very impressive. I think it's not easy to do, and I think it's so important in historical fiction not to have these details thrown in as, you know, indications of the history, but rather that they feel such a natural part of the story, which is one of the things I loved, because I see something that was familiar and it makes me smile with the memories of that time. So I really loved that part. You had, I think, a collage that you made.
Yeah.
Some of the words and the memories and.
Yeah, so I've been spending the last 6 years kind of in this world. So a lot with Gwendolyn Brooks, doing a lot of research at the Detroit Historical Museum, and looking at researching Muhammad Ali and some of the images and words that were involved in the story. We don't have your sound, Carol. Okay.
You don't have my sound?
Now we do.
Can you hold up the collage right in the middle of the screen so people can see the whole thing?
Sure.
Yeah, there you go. That's great. Thanks. I love that. So memory may plant a seed for a story or trigger some thought that extends from that memory. And it's so lovely how you do that in the book. I know that also poetry has been part of your life always. And I wonder if you could talk about how that led to Miles from Motown, or what the first, I guess, what your poetry background really was and how rich a background in poetry you brought to the writing of the book.
Yes, my mom started me very, very young. She used to read to me Ogden Nash and the Tale of Custard the Dragon, and I think I liked the silliness of the language and the way it sounded. Also, she read me E. Cummings, which has been wonderful for my punctuation and the way I write in general. And anyone who's edited me will know that. I was surrounded in a community when I lived in Kalamazoo. I was surrounded by poets. We had a rich wealth of poets, including Margaret DeRitter, Elizabeth Kurlikowski, John Rubicki, and Diane Seuss. And many of those poets would actually come to the school that I was teaching at. It was called the Kazoo School. And we'd have a wonderful event called March Winds. And so while the students were writing and learning, I was also picking up tips from them as well. Some of my favorite poets are Gwendolyn Brooks, Naomi Shihab Nye, and Adrienne Rich. And in 2008, I moved into Chicago in 2003, but in 2008, I was able to attend the University of Chicago Graham School and earn my certificate in poetry, studying under Alice George and Dina Ellenbogen. And then participated in a lot of the Rhino workshops and a lot of the readings, and did some poetry reading in the open mics with Rhino, and also at Women and Children First, as well as having been accepted to the Room of Our Own Writers Retreat at the Georgia O'Keeffe Ranch for 4 years, every other year as well.
So it's almost, would somebody who didn't know might think it was just predetermined that you would write Miles from Motown in verse. But as we know from chatting, the first part of the first draft was in prose, right? Can you talk about that back and forth journey that we both had, but that, led you to ultimately really feeling strongly about keeping it in verse?
Yeah, so originally I had submitted it for a novel in a year program with the Story Studio with Juliette Bond. And at that point, there was 20 pages and that was in prose, excuse me. And then eventually, I think getting to the deeper parts of her character, I started playing around with writing it in verse. And so then I was writing in verse, and the poems themselves were very nice, but then the core, the plot line was struggling a little bit. And so what I ended up doing is keeping with the verse, and then I won a finalist in a mentorship contest, and the suggestion was that I write the novel in prose. And so I actually went and rewrote the whole novel in prose. And then in 2016, I won the Prairie Writers' Day manuscript contest. And when I met with the agent, she said, this really reads like a novel in verse. And so then I went back and I reversed all of it. I say reverse the verse, even though it was reversing the prose. But what that did is I was able to see more of the plot points. And the other thing that it did is the poems got, I was looking at more white space, more enjambment, more really looking and dissecting each poem. And so the poems became richer for that journey, actually.
Right. And we don't know if you had not gone back and written it in prose, what that process would have been like. But I had the same experience where the poetry got deeper and clearer and more powerful because of rewriting in poetry again after writing in prose. Right. So it's interesting. You have one of the things that's really interesting to me in the book is because Georgia is a poet, you're writing as Georgia the narrator, and then you're writing as Georgia the poet writing poetry. And I thought it would be interesting to hear some of the comparisons of the poetry that uses the different voices. And there's really a third voice you talk about too in her list poems.
Mm-hmm.
So if maybe read some of those so we can kind of compare the voices.
Okay, so the first poem, the title is The Kiss Tree, and this is in Georgia, the narrator's voice. At bedtime, Mama comes up to kiss me on the top of my head. She gave me a kiss tree when I was 2, told me that every time she kissed me on top of my head, my kiss tree would grow. I know I'm too big for this kind of stuff now, but I lean my head forward for her kiss. I hug her quickly since I'm so mad and I want her to know. I ask her to leave the door ajar and take my journal out, and I write by hallway light. I look out the window and try to find ties in my wishing star, but it seems that it's in the wrong place and I can't see it. I miss the sounds of home, and I write down what I can't hear. Mm. And so now will be her writing in her journal. The streetlight moon. The night sounds are very quiet here. I can't hear Mr. Gregg on his porch listening to Ernie Harwell calling the Tigers plays. Can't hear honking cars on Greenfield, sirens, or motorcycles dragging on 7 Mile. Instead, it's silent. The streetlight shines into my room. It's really only a pretend moon. And then I have one of the poems that's more of a list poem, and this was, the list poem came, I mean, I probably revised about no short than 51 times the whole novel, but here's one of the list poems. It's called How to Not Win a Poetry Contest. Know the rules. Act as if you don't know or understand them. Use your aunt's address even though you don't live with her. Keep it a secret from your mama, even though up to this point, you have never kept anything from her, ever.
It must have been difficult to move between the voices. What was that like for you, just feeling wise? Did you write sequentially, or how did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened is with the initial story, I think it was pretty clear between her telling the story and her writing the poems, and then those other poems came in much later as kind of a structure for the story itself. And it was actually kind of her inner voice. So yeah. The list poems are kind of more like her telling herself, like, okay, no, it's like this.
Right. It's like she tries to take control of the situation.
Right. So she has, like in the beginning of the book, there's a poem in the book that I'm not going to read, but she has the tree manual in her pocket. And actually that series of poems, those were sparked by the tree manual because she needed some rules. How do I do this? What do I do?
Yeah. One thing I love, and I love it in all, I mean, I read a lot of middle grade, but I guess it feels there's such an intensity in the novels in verse that I love the fact that on the surface there is Georgia's story of moving, adjusting, her brother in Vietnam, and that's maybe different for children to read about. But underneath are the almost universal middle grade issues. In the poem that you read, for example, of the beginning separation from family, which is a universal issue. And that's really part of what the story is about, so that it appeals to a broad section of middle grade children. And I love how those two things operate together. Now we get to the question we're all asked. What about your writing process? What's it like to be Lisa Sukenic, the author? At work.
Yes. My writing process is very, very messy. And those of you who have worked with me know that. I do not always write sequentially, which I know sometimes that can be difficult for other people to follow when we're critiquing my work or doing other things. I also need to see things visually. I'm very much a visual learner. And so in the process of writing Miles, I had a gigantic mural paper up in the bedroom that had different colors to follow the storyline. Each character had a different color and each of the themes that came up in the story. So I need to visually see things. I can't just work on the computer only. My ideal writing time is between 7 and 10 o'clock in the morning, which on weekends and vacations work really well. As a full-time teacher, that's not really a thing. I think it's because it's more of my creative brain. I haven't spoken with anyone yet, and I'm still kind of in that zone of being awake and not awake yet. Also, I think I carry my character with me during the day, and I will write things down and jot things down storyline-wise also.
That's great. I wonder if, before we take some questions, and there's some very interesting questions here, I wonder if you could read a bit more for us, and then we'll have you answer some of the questions.
Okay, thank you. The first poem that I'm going to share from my reading section right now is called The Tree. Daddy has promised me trees. I cross my fingers on my one hand. Remember that 2 is bad luck. Like the time that I crossed twice when I wanted to do a project with Ceci and ended up with Wanda instead. Mama pulls up to the curb and parks the car, and I look down. The address painted on the curb is 1020 Pennsylvania. Look, baby, look, our new house. Mama's hand is on my shoulder, feeling warm, but I don't want to feel it. My shoulders are hunched and unhappy. The oak tree from our old backyard is in the front yard. Daddy dug it up last week. It seems to be barely planted. Some roots are sticking up and the leaves are wilted. It looks as uncomfortable as I feel. I turn towards Mama, my eyes hard like marbles. Transplants barely ever make it. I say under my breath. Mama rolls the window down and gathers up her purse as Daddy comes to the door. You talk to her. I'm going in. Daddy slides into the front seat and I decide to stay in the car, and I don't plan on budging. I sit in the car feeling like the tree. It wants the dirt of home, and I want it too. I know the familiar house feeling I get when we park on our street or when we pull into the alley. I can't find my familiar, and I need a way to get back. But right now, I'm stuck here, just like the tree. The next poem that I'm going to read is when she goes to the summer camp, which is not her idea of what she wants to do. Camp Kennedy. The doors open and I can see lanyards, craft supplies, and a woman with a long braid and a shirt that says Flower Power. My eyes walk in, but I want to walk out. The Flower Power woman greets us and tells us her name is Misty and hands Mama a form. There are a few kids playing with a wooden hockey box on the table, one younger kid and an older kid with curly hair and a tiger's hat. She's jumping up and down for every goal, shouting, "Yes, score." I can hardly hear Mama telling them I'm allowed to leave on my own in the afternoon when my brother's home. Mama tries to reach out for me and tell me it's okay. Mama, please, I beg. My voice sounds low and wolf-like. Please, Mama, I don't want to be here. She kisses me. Georgia, stop now. See you tonight. Misty is really nice and tries to ask about what I like to do. She's trying hard, but I've got no try in me. I should be with Aunt Birdie helping with the pickles and sorting out the cosmetics. A few more kids straggle in and get paper and start making cootie catchers. I don't want to stare, but turn around and see the girl with the baseball cap, and she looks up at me. How long are you in here for? She sounds as pleased as I feel. It feels like a summer jail sentence. Good morning, I guess. I can leave after lunch. I think this is the girl from down the street from the bowling ball house. She shoots out her hand like a grown-up to shake hands. Naomi, she says, and points to her Detroit Tigers hat. Georgia, I say, with a half-bent smile. And this is still in their process of becoming friends. Tuesday, June 20th, getting to know you. Today I walk up to camp on my own. Naomi runs up to me. I'm saving up to get S&H green stamps from the mobile gas station to buy a new baseball mitt. Naomi talks fast-paced back and forth. She barely takes a breath or stops moving. just like the boxer Muhammad Ali, the champ, 6 times Golden Gloves champion. My brother Ty and I used to watch him all the time. She glances back at me. It's just Mom, Grandpa Herman, and me since Dad moved out. Do you have brothers and sisters? I have 2. My brother Jerome, he's in 12th grade, and my brother Ty's in Vietnam. I say it slowly and quietly. Don't want the peace sign counselor to hear this. My brother Jerome is very good at baseball. He was playing varsity and does some pitching. The coach didn't agree with my parents' decision to move in his senior year. He's working for the Parks and Rec and will be coaching the boys team. I feel strange that this is more than I've said to anyone in a week. Boys team and me, that's my team. Naomi squints and puts her hand up to block the sun. Why'd you move if he's going to play varsity? I don't know, and my parents are keeping it a secret. I think about Ty, Jerome, and Detroit. I'm about to answer, but she has already taken off for the baseball diamond. The fields are surrounded by concrete walls and apartments on the other side. I think about boxing and Ty and say to myself, float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, as Muhammad Ali would say. I go back inside and help one of the younger girls do the box stitch with the lanyard. After lunch, I stay and work at the craft corner. I don't want to face my new house today. Okay, I'll share a couple more poems. Planting my poem under our tree. I read the second line, RESPECT, Aretha, it's time to go downtown. I take the paper, fold it in half, in quarters, and finally in eighths, until it's the size of a peach pit. I dig around close to the tree's roots and plant my words, remember them, cover them with dirt, remember Miss Brooks's poem about Skipper the goldfish buried under the old garden tree. I look up at the sky, could not ask God to win, try not to have a selfish thought like Aunt Birdie taught me when saying a prayer or making a request. I say 4 words, please let me win. I imagine my poem being painted on a wall in the city, Detroit, not here. I look up and the clouds become my mural. The wind erases them with one big gust. They leave. The next poem is a short poem, second to my last poem, and this is one of the list poems. How to make a friend. Be interested in this new girl, even though she's not your type. Know that she will never be like Ceci. Pretend to like dogs and keep your face away from her so he never licks you. And then my very last poem that I'm going to read is called Pieces Hidden, Friday, June 30th. The next day at camp, we finish our mosaics. The words peace, not war, glitter from the tiles. I bring mine home after lunch and hide it in my closet towards the back and cover it with a towel. Mama and Daddy can't think I'm a war protester. I hide it well and I get out my journal. My family is a mosaic. We are so many pieces and parts. Aunt Birdie and Ceci in Detroit, a piece of us so far away in Vietnam, a jagged edge to the side. I do not know the jungles of Vietnam, the rice paddies, the war. My family is a mosaic in pieces.
That's so powerful. I get chills when I hear it, and I've heard it and read it several times. It's just beautiful. Thank you so much, Lisa. Are you ready to take a few questions?
Sure.
We have a question from Linda, who asks, why was it important to show that Muhammad Ali was taking a different stance on the Vietnam War than Georgia's dad?
Well, obviously I wanted to set up the dichotomy that, and also make people think, children and adults be thinking about that it's not always that simple, that there's different personalities and different perspectives and different politics that are involved in making those decisions, even within her family. Because obviously her father is very proud and very patriotic and, obviously wants his son to come home from Vietnam. Mom is unsettled because she has lost her brother in Vietnam and wants to protect her son. And Georgia misses her big brother. And so, there's kind of 3 different perspectives, even within the family.
Interesting. Yeah. one thing we've talked about that we didn't put into our main conversation is a question from Deb, who says, "I'm so excited to read your book, Lisa. Your students and colleagues know what an amazing teacher you are. Does being a teacher influence your writing and writing style in any way?" And I just want to say, before you start answering, to let people know that there are some interviews that Lisa has done that will be online. One is online already, which is the Teaching Authors blog interview. And Lisa talks about teaching in some of the interviews as well. So, but go ahead. Does being a teacher influence your writing and writing style in any way?
Yes, I would say that being a teacher influences my writing because I read a lot. So part of my job at the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools is reading books for the Global Reading Challenge the following year. So we spend, my colleagues and I spend a great deal of time reading books and really examining books, and if those are books that we want to use in our selection. Also, it influences how I teach children how to write. So every year in my class, each child writes their own novel. And so part of what they've been seeing me go through the last few years, they get to experience, some willingly and some not so much, depending if they feel that they're confident writers or not. I tend to get an interesting mix of students where I get these children who love writing, and so, you know, they put children into my class, and then other children who really struggle with writing, so they put students into my class, and that's great because that's what teaching is meeting the student where they are and taking them to the next point. I will have, I do believe I have one of my students in the audience who also wrote a review, so shout out. I won't embarrass by using names, but thank you for coming. Also, I will be doing a teacher's guide that will be available on my website, and some of the areas of focus would be looking at poetry study, novel and verse. My colleague Linda Vita and myself spend April and May doing a novel and verse curriculum, and actually we invited Carol to share her book Reenie's Turn as one of the selections last year, and the students were thrilled to have her come into the class, virtually of course. This lends itself to doing a lot of work with history and timelines, studying Gwendolyn Brooks, Muhammad Ali, the Vietnam War, also looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and there's many programs that are of quality that can be referred to. Looking at social emotional issues, bullying, loss, transition, self-advocacy, and pop culture, and an obvious one with Miles From Motown is the music of that time period as well. And I just saw one of my students congratulating me. I'm not sure if she wants me to use her name or not, but she gave me a wonderful review also. That's the problem of being just a list. We can't interact and
It's great. And as someone who had the privilege of meeting with both the small group that wrote novels in verse, the larger, the small group read Reenie's Turn, then a bigger group wrote novels in verse, and then the whole class. The impressive teaching that was going on in the capacity of the children to discuss literature was really so exciting and so amazing. And it speaks to your teaching. And Linda's teaching as well.
Yeah, I feel like my colleague Linda Vita should be like right at the third panel because we spent.
It was just so amazing to be a guest in yours and Linda's classroom. What I wanted to ask is also, how does it feel weird to be now in a position where you can teach your own novel?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think along the process in the last 5 years, since Miles took 6 years total, and the whole process from the beginning words to publication, and I think that I would share a little bit, but obviously I wasn't going to share, different drafts and different versions. But it was more the approach to writing and how you deal with things when you have a hard time coming up with an idea, and process writing in that point. And I'm very excited to use it next year. We also more than likely will use Inside Out and Back Again, and also Becoming Muhammad Ali. So it'll be a nice fit.
Libby asks, will you be doing author visits, Lisa? I know you'll be in your own classroom this year, but will virtual visits perhaps be possible?
Absolutely, yeah. So I have, obviously during planning time, but obviously as a teacher, I have, time off that I'm allowed to take, and sure, we will be able to do that, of course.
Kate has a statement and a question. You have such lovely language. Do you read poetry in all your spare time? Ha ha. To stay immersed, or are you drawing on the long history, knowledge of poetry from your childhood?
Yes, I read poetry, I read fiction, a lot of middle grade. Naomi Shihab Nye has had my heart for a very long time. I've had the privilege of being able to see her several times in person. And so I will visit, and see poets live when the opportunity arises.
Let's see, we have some very interesting questions here. I'm going to ask, I'm glad that J.S. Puller changed the question because you had already answered the first one. So congratulations, Lisa, you already answered my first question. So here's another one. What's next? Do you have another novel planned?
Yes, I do. I have, my working title is Mississippi Flyaway, and it's about a young girl who is in 8th grade. She is an art student, and she and her friend are trying to get into an art school, which is very common in Chicago, that you have the opportunity to apply for a select school if you would like to do that. But she has just found out that in the process that her parents, she obviously knew her parents were divorced, but that according to the agreement, she has to go up to Honor, Michigan and stay with her dad and his husband at their bed and breakfast during vacations. And with that book, she will travel back and forth from Honor to Chicago. There's a lot of ornithology in the book, which I'm thrilled about. And there's a mystery woman artist who lives in the area in northern Michigan, which will be part of the mystery. And more research, yay!
Bill asks, do your own students' narratives ever serve as a kind of mentor text for you as a writer? That's so interesting.
Yeah, I would say sometimes. I think Georgia is kind of a conglomerate of my past people that I have taught. I think aspects of the personalities sneak in different novels, depending. Yeah.
Let's see. I think we have another question. Well, you kind of answered this. Someone asked, what do you learn about writing from your students? That's a little bit different take.
Yeah. I think I have had so many amazing poets in my classroom that basically the way they're using the language and looking at the past year, such powerful poems that they've come up with politically and personally based on their life situations. Have, with permission, actually, I shared some of the poetry with Carol with the students' permission, and they, I could basically, put down my pen for the rest of my life, because they're right there. They're at the core, they're right at the ground level with the language, the emotion, and pretty much, they don't use a lot of filters. It's right there.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you would like to say before we hand things back to the store?
No, the main thing is I want to thank everyone for coming on a Sunday evening in the summertime. I know it's, well, at least in Chicago right now, it's a gorgeous day outside. This has been a very long journey, and I've had so much support along the way. And the fact that this book is three-dimensional is an amazing thing, and I'm very happy to have been able to share this with you tonight.
That's great. Just going to make sure we have no more questions. I think we answered everything. And here's Lynn to take us.
Thanks so much, both of you, Lisa and Carol. This has been such a delight. The questions you got were really fun and interesting. I just want to thank everyone who came out this evening. We'll be posting this so more people can see it. And again, Lisa, just congratulations on your wonderful book. We're so happy for you.
I have a few last words. I see all of the comments, but I don't want to mess anything up with the crowdcast, so I'll respond personally. I don't want to zoom in or out of the screen.
All right. Very good. Again, thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.